Shabbat Shalom, everyone. I had a baking adventure when I first lived in Israel. There is something in Israel called self-rising flour, which means that in the flour, they've already put in a rising agent. Now, for those of you that don't bake, whatever you make, whether it's cake or cookies or bread, has some element of flour and then something that makes it rise, like baking soda or yeast. You need to sit down. You're not helping. Right. But my Hebrew wasn't good enough to read on the package that this was self-rising flour, and I was not familiar with this kind of flour. So the first few times that I tried to bake in Israel, well, let's just say that the cookies came out the opposite of matzah. And it was a really frustrating experience. I couldn't figure out what was going wrong with my baking there. And then someone finally helped me catch on. No, the rising agent's already mixed in. You don't have to add double the rising agent. So raise your hand if you've traveled abroad and you've had one of those experiences where you're a little bit at sea, where you didn't realize a local custom, or has anyone else had that? Yeah. Well, apparently Moshe did too, because as we saw in this week's Parsha, he actually names one of his children Gershom, Ger, stranger, Sham, there. So the commentators say, what does it mean to be a stranger? And in honor of Inclusion Month, we'll talk about what it means when you don't feel like everybody else. The Mechilta says, why didn't Moshe feel like everyone else? They were worshiping the gods of Midian, and he was worshiping Hashem. And so he felt out of place. So being a stranger is the experience of doing things differently than those around you. Gunther Plaut, who is a 20th century commentator, says, no, it's a misunderstanding of where that name comes from. It actually comes from the verb geresh, which means to send away, to repulse. And so I think that's an interesting perspective, because in the example of the Mechilta, it's about how Moshe felt. He felt like he was different than everybody else. But in the example from Rabbi Plaut, it's saying it's the experience that others impose upon the stranger, right? They send them away, they reject them. Then there was a reading that was different altogether, which was the reading of Hertz. He's also a 20th century commentator. And he said, no, Moshe actually had a very good experience in Midian. He was embraced by Yitro and his family. But when his son was born, he was thinking about all of the Israelites in Egypt who were still suffering. And he was saying, they are still strangers there. And what I like about that reading is he's saying Moshe continued to have compassion for those that were suffering because they were different. I thought that was an interesting twist. The idea of the stranger is not just in this Parsha, it's not just contained in Gershom's name, but many times in the Torah we are told, do not oppress the stranger, for you were strangers once. Then the rabbis decide to get more specific in the Talmud. They want to know what exactly does it mean to oppress a stranger. Some of them thought it was financial oppression, but one of them, Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani, said, no, it wasn't about finances. It was about verbal abuse. And he goes on to explain his answer. He says, look, you can always pay someone back money that you've taken from them or extorted in some way. But once you've said unkind things, once you've made someone feel their otherness, you can never take that back. So that's how he ended up saying oppression is verbal abuse of the stranger. Rashi had a different read. He said, oppression of the stranger is to critique the stranger for something you don't like about yourself, which I actually thought was pretty deep psychology. He's talking about bullying, right? Why does a bully bully? Because the bully is trying to hide his own feeling of differentness or inadequacy or vulnerability. So by pointing it out in someone else, oppressing someone else, perhaps no one will notice in the bully that he is also vulnerable and different and has deficiencies. You know, the experience in Israel with the flower, that's a humorous experience of being a stranger in a strange land, but there were other experiences that were not so funny. Getting lost and realizing I'd wandered into a neighborhood that wasn't so safe, but having not a good sense of the city as to how to get back and not enough Hebrew or Arabic to really ask for help. That was a scary experience about being a stranger in a strange land. So I think that when Moses names his son Gershom, he is asking his people to remember, and he is asking his descendants to remember, that the stranger needs to be included. And that's something that I'm very proud of at Beth Torah. We are constantly trying to extend ourselves to the stranger and to be welcoming and not oppress those among us who are different. So may we continue in our mighty efforts to do so. Shabbat Shalom.